talking about doing everything through you and making yourself available to God and letting God work through you. And that's kind of what the message is about tonight. This morning we talked about building a bridge and you being a bridge between heaven and hell for the lost people. And tonight we're going to talk about how sometimes a bridge is not required. We're supposed to lead them through the valley, or whatever it is that God wants them to go through. Sometimes there ain't a bridge where you can help people get over things. You have to go through it with them. And it's a very hard lesson to learn. It's a very hard skill to master. And being a peacemaker, that is what we are called to do. Now, I want to talk about the book of Joshua, chapter 3. I'm not going to read the whole chapter tonight. I'm going to just pick out a couple of verses. Mr. Cody got them all queued up, right? Well, I'm not going to read them all. Let me just tell you what was going on. In Exodus, we learn how God used Moses to bring Israel out of Egypt. 40 years they wandered in the wilderness. And the only thing that separated them from the wilderness and the promised land was the Jordan River. And the Jordan River was there. And they could see it. And all they had to do was just get over it. If we could just get over this river, we would finally enter into the blessed promised land that God told us about, that God delivered us to, that God freed us from bondage to come and enjoy. Finally, after 40 years, we're here. Who will lead us over it? How can we get over it? How do we get to it? Well, God had a plan, and it was a very specific plan. It wasn't that a bridge was going to magically appear, that they were going to find a bridge that was already built. In those days, what was going on was that the Levites and the priests would walk in the front of the Jewish people. And the Levites were the ones that would put poles in the Ark of the Covenant where the presence of God was, and they would lead the people with the presence of God. They would be out in front of the people at all times. There they were. They had left Egypt. They were in the wilderness. They had gotten finally to the promised land, and there was this big river there. So surely what God is going to do is just make them walk across on the water, and everybody else would follow them. That's probably what a lot of them had in mind. Well, that's not what God had in mind. In verse number 8, I want to look at that. This is what God gave instructions for them to do. God said, tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's water, go and stand in the river. Now, I had to look up to see how big of a river the Jordan River was. It wasn't the Jordan Creek, okay? It wasn't the Jordan Stream. It was the Jordan River. And if you tried to walk across it, the water would go over your head. And the current was such that you would be swept away. I'm sure like it was back in these days. So going and standing in the water is probably one of the weird instructions from God. Read any weird instructions from God in the Bible? That God told people to do things and it's like, well, this is crazy. How is this going to work out? There's a few. I mean, one of the weirdest ones to me was when Abraham went without a son forever, and finally, when he's 100 years old, he has a son, and when he's about 17 years old, God tells him, all right, take him up on the mountain and sacrifice him. I waited all this time for this, and now you want me to just go kill him? I guess you have a plan. And he trusted him and he went on, and God did have a plan. See, God's plans are not to destroy us. They're not to frustrate us. They're not to bring us down. They're not to put us and Him. They're opportunities for obedience. So when God calls us to do something that we don't want to do or that don't make any sense at all, that's an opportunity to be obedient to God. It's a chance for God to show you that He's got this. So, what did they do? They picked up the Ark of the Covenant. They marched down to the edge of the water, and they went into the water. Didn't make much sense, but that's what God told us to do, so we're going to do it. Now, in verse 17, it says, Then the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan. And all Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. Okay? Oh yeah. He's done this before. He just did it 40 years ago when we left Egypt. There was probably a bunch of them that's like, well, if He could part the sea, surely He can handle a river. And that's what God had in mind. Jesus made a bridge so that we could get from earth and sin to heaven and forgiveness. But while we're here on earth, we got to go through some stuff. And God will make a way every single time for you to get through it. Your end result may be that your body gives out and dies. That may be the worst thing that ever happens to you. But that is what you have to go through to get to be where God is. That's the worst thing, y'all. Well, actually, I think the worst thing is having to stay here and be in pain or with a broken heart or something like that. I mean, death is much better than those things. To me, it seems so. Because if I die, I go to be with Jesus. And to be absent in bodies, to be present in the Lord, and that seems like a pretty good deal to me. So death is not really that big of a deal to a Christian. But I'm going to tell you something. Being stuck behind and having to go through surgeries or diseases and losing loved ones and things like that, that's the hard part. But that is something that we have to go through because we live in a fallen world. Bad things happen. God lets them happen so that we will want to go on home. If everything was cushy here, y'all, you wouldn't ever want to leave. But God allows just enough things for us to go through that we lived a few. Check out. Like, I've had enough of this place. Check, please. I'm ready to go. Tip. I don't know if I'm going to leave a tip. But anyway. The people helped the Israelites cross. I want to focus on them, the priests and the Levites. Normally, priests and the Levites marched before the people and took the presence of God before the people. And if God gave instructions, they would, from the front of the line, shout the instructions back to the people so that everybody would receive the instructions of God. That was how it went. In this case, God told them to go and stand in the middle of the river. They went and stood in the middle of the river on dry ground. God parted the waters. Now, why did God do this? And why did God tell them to stay there? He told them to stand in the middle. So when every Israelite came to the Jordan, they had to walk right by the priests and the Levites and go on over to the other side. They didn't leave the middle until everybody else was safely on the other side. And the lesson that I find in this is order. So often we may go to where somebody's at in the middle of trouble. They're in the middle of chaos, in the middle of the worst time they've ever had. And they need somebody to go to be where they are. Like Jesus did. He got in the middle of the situation. But they need somebody to stay there till they get out. Because you can go for a minute, maybe they haven't received peace yet. Maybe it takes a long time for them to receive. They may not receive peace till they get out of that trouble, till that time passes. So what God was showing them is that you priests, what I want you to do, your role had been to always go before and stand out front and lead. But now I'm calling you to a different position. Because God calls all of us to do different things at different times. You might have been doing the same thing, serving in the same way for a very long time, and God's calling you to a new location. He's calling you to a different position. There may be just a tweak that's involved. I mean, preachers change churches, people in a church step up and become teachers and leaders and different things like that. God calls you to a new location. So when you get there, you've got to make sure that everybody makes it over to the promised land before you go. As y'all's pastor, I don't want to see any of y'all go to hell. So I try to prepare and preach as hard as I can every single week so that you understand that God loves you, that Jesus died for you, and that He's still alive, and you can be with Him one day. You know, and if I fail to do that, then that's like me leaving you in the middle of all of this without any hope. Then it's just not right. God told them to stay in the middle till everybody made it safely to the other side. And that's what we are called to do as peacemakers. Stay in the middle. No bridge required. Just go through it with them. So they did. And they were not alone. As hard as somebody you love and care about going through something awful, it is very, very hard when you get in the middle of it too and you start suffering right alongside of them. The Apostle Paul was one of the greatest preachers. Paul would go to where the people are and he would become basically their champion. If there was heat on this particular group of people, Paul would go in because there was a lot more heat on Paul than anybody else. And he would allow them to get away or escape or, get through what it is that they were going through, the persecution they were handling. He would take it off. And he made sure that he didn't leave till everybody else made it to the promised land. Paul was a peacemaker, maybe unlike any other. Paul said that he would do whatever it took. He said, I've become all things to all people. He knew he wasn't going to win them all. But he said, if I can do everything I can so that some get saved, then it's worth it. What Paul understood and what the Levites and the priests understood here is that when they were standing in the middle of the Jordan on dry ground, the Ark of the Covenant was there. And that means that the presence of God was there. You will never have to go through anything alone. You will never have to go through an impossible situation without God being there. He has promised us that. He has shown us time and time again in the Bible. His presence will be there where we are. All right? So, two things tonight. Number one. All right? We got 2 points. You ready? I'm finally to the point section, and then I'm going to close. The first point. Are you prepared to go through things with other people to bring them peace? Okay? If there's something keeping you from being dedicated to loving your neighbor, then you're not quite ready to be the peacemaker that God created you to be. What is keeping you from being that? That's number one. Ask God to help you take your spiritual life tonight. See what it is that you're lacking. See what it is that may be a stumbling block that's keeping you from being who God created you to be. Number two, Do you trust God to be with you? First step in trusting that God's going to be with you is knowing that God's going to be with you. You know God's going to be with you? Y'all, there's about 80,000 people in a Hard Rock Stadium in Miami that's a lot more excited about something that's a lot less exciting than what I just said. There's a hooping and a hollering right now. Do you know that God's going to be with you through everything? All right, you know that. Okay? So what is it that He's going to call you to go through that He's not going to go through with you? And what is He going to call you to go through that He Himself has not already gone through? So what is impossible with God? Doesn't the Bible say with God all things are possible? So when God calls us to go through something with somebody, He ain't going to leave us in the middle of it. He's going to be there with us through the whole thing. I think the problem is, and this is me confessing to y'all, sometimes when we get in the middle of it, we get tired or frustrated or just ready for it to be over with. And it's not God that leaves, it's us. We don't see it through. I mean, suppose these guys have been like, all right, we've been holding this box up for a while. It's got 2 stone tablets in it. It's got a jar of bread that fell out of the sky. And it's got air and stick in it that done bloomed. It's kind of heavy. Let's just go. God surely ain't going to make the waters go back on them. We've done our part. We got the waters to split, didn't we? Oh, yeah, you did it. But they didn't do that. But that's what I do sometimes. That's what we all do. We're like, all right, I gave it some effort. I tried. Do we ever just try and think it's enough? But it's not enough. Jesus called us to be, as He said, second Christian. If somebody asks you to go a mile with them, you go 2. Some of y'all walkers, y'all walk a mile. I ain't talking about the Walking Dead. But you walk every day, you knock out a mile like nothing. Okay. Some people ain't. Some people get to a mile and they're like, that's a mile. I will on purpose, if I forget something at the back of Walmart, we just ain't going to have that. We forgot trash bags. Well, we got a trash can. We're just going to dump it right into the one outside and rinse it out. That's what we're going to do. Because I ain't walking all the way back there and back. It's gone. That's who I am. All right? And I'm supposed to come alongside somebody and not only go back to the trash bags with them, but then walk over and get a stick of deodorant with them. And they forgot their trash bag. So we got to go all the way back there again and then walk back up to the cash register. Now you might be like, Walmart ain't that big. Well, I just don't like to be in there. I feel like when I go into Walmart, I have an anxiety attack because I feel like I can almost see the germs floating around. It's like little specks in the air. It's like I can almost see them, you know? And the buggy, thank goodness they put those wipes there. I'm wiping that joker down. It ain't been clean like that ever. And I'm wiping it down. I wipe all the way around. I wipe down in there. Everything's good. Then I wipe my hands down. Then I throw it away. I'm like, all right, it's desanitized. But everything in there that I touch has not been desanitized. So I'm putting it in the buggy. Afterwards, I'm walking out Walmart like this. Not because my hands are clean, but I have touched things. I have been around people. I hear a cough, and I'm like a bomb went off. I can't go buy no chips now. There's a cough over there. It's crazy, right? But if somebody needs me to go there, Just hold your breath and go. Put on a mask. Pull your shirt up like a bandit, right? If God is calling you to go through something with somebody, He's not going to let you just go to ruin because of it. You're doing exactly what Jesus would have done if He had been here. Okay? So, in order to be an effective peacemaker, you've got to understand God's going to be with you. Okay? Trust that God's going to be with you. And jump in there and don't jump out. Make sure that everybody makes it through. No man left behind, so to speak. All right? So if there's anything you need to pray about, if there's anything keeping you from being that, I want you to pray about it and go and serve the way that God has called you to serve. If you've never trusted that God's going to be there with you, maybe you've never trusted Him to be your Savior. He loves you, and He has made a way that you can be forgiven of your sins and live forever. So trust Him tonight. And let's leave this place with a lot more confidence in God. And it'll help us to be more confident in ourselves. All right? Let's all stand. We're going to sing an invitational hymn. If you'd like to pray with me or at the altar, now's the time.